My name is Katya Prince, and this is a presentation on organization and administration support for assessment. Now, the role of an online instructor is twofold, both as a course designer before the course begins and as a course facilitator as the course goes on. The purpose of this presentation is to discuss a particular principle that should drive good teaching and learning. That principle is assessment. Now, achievement of learners is highly relevant to the evaluation of education in any form. After all, the effectiveness and ultimately the credibility of instruction and of instructional delivery is fundamentally a question of what students learn. Because of this, it has been said that assessment is the engine which drives student learning. So what then is assessment? Assessment provides a measure of students' progress. Also, it is a means to engage students with their learning. Assessment is a principle that must be embraced from the first day in the classroom because of its link to the scholarship of teaching. So this presentation and the guidelines contained therein are specifically geared towards a junior faculty member, one that is basically transitioning from student to faculty member. This person has some experience in the traditional classroom, but very limited or no experience in the online environment. And so these guidelines for assessment are being provided for this faculty audience to emphasize the importance of planning and developing assessment. The intent is to show the link between scholarship of assessment and scholarship of teaching so that the junior faculty member can embrace assessment as a whole. Learning objectives direct attention to the learner and the types of behaviors they should exhibit following instruction. Now, some best practices for developing course objectives are describing the intended result of instruction rather than the strategies for facilitating learning. Communicating an objective as clearly as possible to avoid misinterpretation is another best practice. Also, describing the kinds of information within a topic that learners will be expected to recall is another one. And describing or listing the names of concepts for which learners will be asked to classify examples and providing an example of what the learner will be able to do when the rule is applied are also some best practices in terms of developing learning objectives. The most important thing to keep in mind is that effective learning objectives are consistent with the goals of the curriculum. They're clearly stated, they're measurable, they're realistic, and more importantly, doable and appropriate for the level of the learner. When it comes to alignment of assessment and objectives, assessment must be embedded in and aligned with the design of the course in order for it to be effective. Two major reasons for aligning assessments with learning objectives are that one, alignment does increase the probability that instructions will provide students with the opportunities to learn and practice the knowledge and skills that's going to be required in all of the various assessments that they design. Also, when assessments and objectives are aligned in the way that they should be, good grades are more likely to translate into good learning. As far as assessment planning, it's best to grade students on the basis of course assignments, things like major papers, and also on their contributions to the asynchronous threaded discussions. Special projects are appropriate as well, too. The key thing to remember is that quizzes and examinations are not an effective, valid, and reliable assessment of student learning. So if you are going to use them, it's important to use other assessments to go along with them. Now, in terms of collecting assessment data, determining if true learning has occurred in the classroom is no easy task. Practical approaches for instructors to become knowledgeable about best practices in assessment in general and how to develop standards and benchmarks based on both content and the professional context in which that content resides. Now, one way to collect this data is through formative assessments. Now, formative assessments are carried out during the instructional process. They're carried out to monitor students' learning, and any adjustments that need to be made to improve teaching or learning is done during this assessment. It is not part of the grading process. Formative assessments must directly relate to learning objectives and instructional activities, and also feedback is central to using formative assessments. There are a few strategies that incorporate formative assessments. Peer assessments, which are a form of collaborative activities, are an example of formative assessments. Other strategies that incorporate formative assessments are summaries and reflections. Now, these strategies allow instructors to check for understanding and gather evidence of learning in a classroom. Another way to collect assessment data is through summative assessments. These type of assessments measure the effectiveness of instructional programs at the end of an instructional unit or even at a predetermined time. Now, summative evaluations are used to determine if students have mastered specific competencies and to identify instructional areas that need additional attention. Now, since the goal of summative assessment is to evaluate student learning rather than to monitor it, tools for summative assessments are typically used as unit tests, midterm, final exams, formal assignments, and also projects. Now, once instructors have developed assessment measures for collecting course-level student learning, it's important to determine what the evidence reveals about student progress towards the learning goals that were set. So it's important to look at what the data suggests about what students know or have learned, what the data reveal about students' abilities to apply the knowledge they've learned, and what the data show about what students value. The Plan, Do, Stepped, Act, or PDSA cycle is a systematic series of steps for gaining valuable learning and knowledge for the continual improvement of a product or process. Also known as the Deming cycle, the cycle starts with the plan step. Now, this step involves identifying a goal or purpose, formulating a theory, defining success metrics, and putting a plan into action. These activities are then followed by the Do step. In the Do step, the components of the plan are implemented. Then comes the Study step. In the Study step, outcomes are monitored to test the validity of the plan for signs of progress and success, or problems and areas for improvement as well too. Now, the Act step closes the cycle. It integrates the learning generated by the entire process. Now, what is learned can then be used to adjust the goal, change methods, or even reformulate a theory altogether. These 4 steps are repeated over and over as part of a never-ending cycle of continual improvement. Now, this cycle, the PDSA, can be used as a model for continuous improvement when planning data collection and analysis in order to implement any change. It's ideal in assessing the assessment to ensure that what has been put in place in terms of measuring learning in the classroom is indeed effective. Thank you. That's all, folks.